let's look at the basics of nouns and parsing nouns. So we're going to begin with the concept of inflection. Inflection applies to nouns, and nouns are inflected for case, gender, and number. The gender is masculine, feminine, or neuter, and the number is singular or plural. When we look at case, there are four major cases. There's a fifth one that's called vocative, but the four major ones are the ones that we want to pay attention to. The four major cases are first nominative. The nominative is the subject of a sentence. So here's an example. Ean tis agapa ton kosmon. Now here we have the word tis. It is a nominative masculine singular noun, and it's serving as the subject of this sentence. If anyone loves the world. So it is the subject of the verb agapa, loves. The next case we're interested in is the genitive case. The genitive modifies a noun. The genitive can be a noun itself, but it normally is in conjunction with another noun which it modifies. So here's an example. Diakonos Christou Iesu. So here we have Christou Iesu, our genitive. So the word diakonos is servant. That's a nominative, but that's not as important here. This is the word servant that is being modified by the genitive phrase Christou Iesu. And so we have servant of Jesus Christ. So the words of Jesus Christ limit or modify who this person is a servant of. So it's giving some kind of definition or providing some kind of parameters for this word diakonos. So the genitive is a modifier in general. Another example here is he agape to theou, the love of God. So here we have to theou. This is a genitive expression, the genitive article. So literally this would be the love of the God, I guess, but we don't typically say that for when we say capital G, God is our translation. So love is our noun, and to theou modifies it or gives parameters for it. So it's the love, not just any old love, but the love of God. Okay, the next case we're going to look at is the dative. The dative sets up relation. So it expresses relation, often to, in, by, or with. So as an example, we have the phrase lege to anthropo. This means he said to the man. Now, to anthropo is the man. This is the definite article, to, and then anthropo is the noun. So it's the man, and then the dative gives it the idea of to the man. So the dative encapsulates that idea of relation to something. In this case, it's the indirect object, as we would say in English. In summary, to anthropo encapsulates to, that's the dative, and then the man is literally the definite article to and anthropo, man. So we have to the man. Okay, finally, one more example. This is from 1 John 1:1. Heorakamen tois ophthalmois hemon. So heorakamen is we have heard, and then we have tois ophthalmois. This is the definite article, dative masculine plural, ophthalmois, and then followed by hemon, which is of us. So literally, we have heard with the eyes of us. And so the dative is giving us the idea of with. Tois ophthalmois is the eyes, and then the dative is giving us the idea of with the eyes. There's a relationship, and with the eyes of us, we would say that as with our eyes. Finally, we're going to look at the accusative case. Now, the accusative is the object of a verb. So let's look at the same example we saw under nominative. Ean tis agapa ton kosmon. If anyone loves the world. Now we noticed before that tis is the subject. Here we have ton kosmon, definite article ton, which is accusative, masculine, singular, and then kosmon. Article has to agree with the noun in case, number, and gender, and so we have ton kosmon. And this is the object of the verb agapa, and so if anyone loves the world, and so it's accusative case, serving as the direct object of the verb agapa, if anyone loves the world. Now let's move on to the idea of declension. So declensions provide an encoding scheme for writing inflections. And so there's 3 different declension schemes. The first one is called, surprisingly, first declension, and most feminine nouns fall under first declension. Let's take a look at a table here of declensions from the Mounts textbook. You'll notice that this is on page 47 of the Mounts textbook. Show it right here, page 47 of the Mounts Greek textbook, Basics of Biblical Greek by William D. Mounts. And we're on page 47, and the one here is to indicate first declension, feminine. And so here are our first declension ending patterns. Most feminine nouns are first declension. There are a few outliers. For instance, we have some agent nouns that are masculine, that taste nouns, the nouns that end in taste. So an example, prophetes. So there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, first declension is feminine nouns. Second declension is another pattern for creating inflections, and most masculine nouns are second declension. Now let's go take a look at our chart again, and we'll notice over here we've got second declension masculine, and here's the patterns that we see. And then second declension also includes a lot of neuters, and here are the patterns for the neuters. We'll come back to these, but this is just an introduction to declensions. So most masculine nouns are second declension. There are some oddballs. We said that most feminine nouns are first declension, but there are a few that are second declension, like hadas, way or road. That is a feminine noun that is second declension. So in general, most feminine nouns are first declension, but there are a few exceptions. Now the third declension can take up any gender. A lot of neuters are third declension, and they're sort of odd in various ways. They fall into various patterns, and we're not going to cover third declensions in this session. And so let me just mention that, for instance, a lot of the so-called ma-mat neuters, like pneuma, spirit, wind, haima, blood, there's a lot of these ma-mat neuters, and the genitive is pneumatos. Anyway, so third declensions are kind of their own world, and we'll be looking at first and second declensions. Let's discuss now how to read a lexicon. And so for any word in a lexicon, we're going to look for its lexical entry, and we're going to be doing it for nouns in particular right now. The lexical entry is also sometimes called the dictionary entry. So let's look at an example. Here is the word angelos. And so this is a typical beginning of the lexical entry for this word. You'll also get a definition and some other information, but right now we're interested in these first pieces of information that we get. So the first thing we see is the lexical form. And for a noun, that is the nominative singular form. And so for angelos, this is the nominative singular. We got that omicron sigma ending. The next piece of information that we see is the genitive ending. This is very important in finding declension, as we'll see in a few minutes. So this is the genitive ending. It can vary. There's various genitive endings. This is a very typical one for second declension. The third piece of information is the definite article. It will give you the nominative singular form of the definite article. So here we have, for this one, we have ha, angelos would have a definite article of ha, and that tells you that it's masculine. If you saw he as the definite article, then it would be feminine, and if you saw ta as the definite article, then it would be neuter. So this could vary. Some lexicons are friendly, they just tell you M, F, or N rather than giving you the definite article. But oftentimes you'll see the definite article, and that's your key to the gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter. Now let's look at how to use a lexicon to determine the declension of a noun. This is very important. To determine declension, the first thing that we always look at is the genitive. That genitive ending, that middle piece of information. And if the genitive ends in eta sigma or alpha sigma, for example, we have arche, or we might say arche. We want to pronounce that he correctly. Notice that the genitive ending is eta sigma. Another example is exousia. The genitive is alpha sigma at the end. What this tells us is that we're looking at a first declension noun. One never wants to say always with Greek, but we can say virtually always. If your genitive ends in eta sigma or alpha sigma, you have first declension. Now, along with that, oftentimes your lexical form will also end in eta or alpha. Notice arche, eta, exousia, alpha, and the gender will be feminine. Notice that in both cases you have a definite article, eta, he, which tells you that you have a feminine. The genitive of eta sigma or alpha sigma tells you you have first declension, virtually always, and then some other things will come along with that. Now let's move on. If our genitive ends in omicron upsilon and the lexical form ends in omicron sigma or omicron nu. Now remember, when we were looking at the previous case, the genitive itself, if it ended in eta sigma or an alpha sigma, told us that we were looking at first declension. But now, if our genitive ends in omicron upsilon, then we also need to check the lexical form and its ending. And if it ends in omicron sigma or omicron noon, for example, logos, the genitive is omicron upsilon or OU, and the ending omicron sigma, or ergon, we have, again, the genitive is OU, omicron upsilon, and the ending omicron noon. This tells us that we have second declension, usually. Remember, you never want to say always with Greek, but it's a pretty safe bet that you're looking at second declension. So if my genitive ends in omicron upsilon and my lexical form ends in omicron sigma or omicron noon, then I'm looking at second declension. Now, notice that this is a masculine, logos is masculine, ergon is neuter, definite article ta. We also have some rare feminines that have the second declension. They have the OU genitive, the omicron upsilon genitive, and they end in omicron sigma. So they follow the pattern, and they're also second declension. Just mention that because occasionally we'll get a feminine. Now, let's take a look at a case where the genitive ends in omicron upsilon, but the lexical form does not end in omicron sigma or omicron noon. There are examples. For instance, prophetes. Here we have the genitive, omicron upsilon, but the nominative singular form, the lexical form, does not end in omicron sigma or omicron noon. It ends in eta sigma. This is first declension, again, usually. And this example here, prophetes, these taste nouns, these agent nouns, are very common. And notice that even though you have omicron upsilon, the rest of the forms all follow the first declension. So for instance, the accusative masculine singular of prophetes is prophetane. And there's that typical eta noon ending for the first declension that we see typically for feminine nouns in the first declension. So here we have a genitive ending in omicron upsilon, but we note that the lexical form does not end in omicron sigma or omicron noon. And here's a case where this eta sigma tells us that we're looking at first declension. Finally, let's look at cases where the genitive ends in something other than eta sigma, alpha sigma, or omicron upsilon. And here's some examples. We've got gnosis, knowledge. Notice the genitive here is epsilon omega sigma, or pneuma, that is spirit or wind. The genitive here is atas, alpha tau omicron sigma, or ethnos, nation. And here we have the genitive as omicron upsilon sigma. In all these cases, we're looking at third declension. So when our genitive is something other than the ones that we've been looking at already, we can pretty well take it to the bank that we're looking at third declension. So let's review. If our genitive ends in ace or as, we're looking at first declension, eta sigma or alpha sigma. If our genitive ends in omicron upsilon and the lexical form ends in omicron sigma or omicron noon, we're looking at second declension. If our genitive ends in omicron upsilon, but our lexical form does not end in omicron sigma or omicron nu, then we need to look at our lexical form. If we have an eta sigma, then it's a pretty safe bet that we're looking at first declension. And then finally, if the genitive ends in something other than ace, as, or u, then we're probably looking at third declension. Now we're ready to move on and look at parsing nouns.